Welcome to Kinky Knots Cafe, Proactive is the Way, where we provide you tools and resources to enhance your mind, body, and spirit. Get ready, folks. Let us nurture you from the inside out. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kinky Knots Cafe, Proactive is the Way. We have Miss Tiffany Bryant here with us today. Hey, Tiff, how you doing?
Hey, Toya, I'm doing good. How are you?
You know what? I'm a bit tired. I
I agree.
wore out. Today, my kiddos had basketball practice, and I mean, they tried to wear a sister out 3 hours watching
Well,
basketball. Yeah, Momo
I
had
think
some.
that was exciting though, because little kids are so they are so like vulnerable and so they just go after everything. Their motivation inspires you.
Yeah,
And
well,
especially what I told you about Miss May, honey. May be something great, honey.
I
Because
hope.
when you have that internal type of drive and that internal accountability, like is that the right word I'm trying to think of? Just to yourself,
Mhm.
how hard you are on yourself without anybody even having to tell you, like, where did that even come from?
Yeah, she is. She is. She definitely is hard on herself, wants to do her best in what she does, which is
She
pretty.
is devastated. I have never seen her
Yeah.
like
Because you're talking about last week when they
last week.
lost their
She
game. But
lost her game.
she not only lost her game, she's okay with losing, but if she doesn't perform,
Right. If her performance is not consistent.
yeah, but which is interesting because this is May's first time playing basketball. So I'm thinking to myself, like, what does performance mean for you? Because she's
Who set her bar?
who set her bar because she's just learning how to dribble. She's just learning how to shoot. The concept of guarding a man, she's still learning. She doesn't even know what offense and defense is, or she gets, a little bit confused with regards to the whole notion of how basketball is structured and are the fundamentals of basketball. So when I saw her crying, I was like, it's going to be okay. You are learning. This is a learning experience and just embrace it and keep putting your best foot forward each week. And so this week, she definitely put her best foot forward. She got a little better. So hopefully it will continue. But yeah, so a little tired, but we'll get through it. I was committed. I said we're gonna have to do this. So
Right.
get through it. But hopefully we won't hold you all too long. Wanted to connect again here with regards to the courage to be vulnerable. So happy to have Tiffany back here, and we'll go ahead and continue our discussions. This particular topic came about because we are focusing this month on one of Ray's principles, how to be more radically open-minded. This principle was highlighted in Ray Dalio's book, Principles. And as I was reading the book, Tiffany, he had shared that it's very difficult for people to be open-minded due to some natural barriers that exist within each one of us when it comes to making a decision. And he had shared there was kind of like two biggest barriers to being open-minded and making good decisions. What the two that he mentioned were our ego and then blind spots. And so he said together, these behaviors, these characteristics make it difficult for us to objectively see what is true about ourselves and life circumstances. And as such, it not only hinders our capabilities to make good decisions, but also to leverage each other effectively. Right. So you know, Ray, he's very analytical, right? So he's like, man, we have these blind spots. Our ego is getting in the way. Let's put together a framework. Let's put together a process for how we can become better at being radically open-minded. And I love that about him. But I kept saying to myself, well, that's wonderful. I appreciate all of the work that he puts around that. But is there a way that we can nip it in the bud before having to build frameworks, before having to build processes around navigating people's egos, navigating blind spots? And so I wanted to focus on the why. Why do we have these egos? Why do we develop these blind spots? And so I had 2 weeks ago, I had and did an overview with regards to some of the definitions for the definition for ego, the definition for blind spots. And what I realized is that these barriers, they exist due to our fears
Mm-hmm.
and
So
ability to be vulnerable, right? And so after this realization and my efforts to find a solution to overcoming these barriers to make his job simpler, I stumbled upon one of the greatest researchers on vulnerability, Brene Brown.
right. I love her. I
No,
knew that she was about to
you
say.
got you got to listen to. Have you listened to her TED Talks that she had?
She on YouTube, she on TED Talks.
What?
I listen to her on the two different platforms, but yeah, no, she's really good. And you know, at UCLA, she's part of our curriculum. One
Okay.
of the authors.
Okay, so she is a professor. I know she was a professor at the University of Houston, but I didn't know that her curriculum was built into your program.
No, it's not her curriculum. There's no curriculum.
Oh, there's no
It's just the principles from her book. Like, so we were maybe we weren't mandated or required, but she was like a hot topic when
okay.
I started my PhD program.
Oh, well, fantastic. Yeah. I mean, I ran into her because I was trying to find out, is there any type of resource? And I was like, what? Somebody researches this?
Research vulnerability to see how.
Research vulnerability. She focused for like the last 2 decades studying courage, shame, empathy, fear. And so I found her book. And in her book, Daring Greatly, which has been our featured book for the month, she walks through explaining how vulnerability is both the core of difficult emotions like fear, grief, and disappointment. And throughout her book, she teaches us how to embrace vulnerability. And when we embrace vulnerability, it becomes the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, empathy, innovation, and creativity. So today we will discuss how the inability to be vulnerable and the ramifications thereof played out in our lives, and the steps that we can take to adjust our behavior to be happier, more effective, receptive to others' thoughts and their perspectives, and establish better relationships with each other. And to help us this month, I had an opportunity to connect with two guests to get their perspectives on vulnerability, how they manage it within their lives, and what they learned. So, I don't know if you had a chance to look at the promo for this particular session, but Gregory is the founder of GBS Life Coaching. He is a seasoned professional with a background as a qualified teacher, serving as the head of sport in London for 5 years. Additionally, he's dedicated over a decade of his life as a governor, which was very interesting, for VIP families, providing valuable insights and support as a tutor and a men's life coach. He is a certified life coach, nutritionist, personal trainer, and counselor. I also had an opportunity to interview Julie. I love saying her last name, Coraccio. Strong Italian last name. She is the founder of Reawaken Your Brilliance, serving as an award-winning professional full-term life organizer. Also, she is a self-published author and certified life coach. If you all are interested in learning more about Julie, about Gregory, I have included web addresses to their respective sites in the description, so you can check them out a little bit more later on. All right, so we started off our discussions with understanding their experiences with vulnerability. And we'll start here with Julie. I had Julie talk to me first about a time within her life when she had to be vulnerable.
Yeah, I'll definitely talk about myself. And it's interesting as I was thinking about the interview, because I've had to overcome this because I grew up in a fairly small town, and my family, you weren't allowed to be vulnerable. You could be vulnerable within the family, but not outside that. I was taught, you don't share what the family does with anyone else because you can be harmed because of things that happened to my great grandparents. So there was always that, you never say anything about the family. You always keep it in. So that was a huge part to be vulnerable. Obviously, most of us have been vulnerable when it comes to love, but I want to talk about business because I started my business at 40. And so, people are like, you're nuts or you're old and all that good stuff. And so most of my business life has been being vulnerable, doing it at that age. I was definitely afraid of public speaking. I remember the first time they gave me 30 seconds and I said, I'm Julie Seibert. I own Healing Through Organization, all different name change and different business now. And that's all I could come up with. But the people and the women were so supportive and said, you can do this, keep going. And I filled the 30 seconds. When I specialized in being green, I was living in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time. South isn't exactly the most green area in the country. And so I remember sitting down, a woman, the first thing she says is, I hate people who do what you do. And I was like, well, how do I handle this? Now, in the past, I probably would have stood up and run away or gotten really angry and defensive. Instead, I became curious and said, well, why? And she said, because you're so wasteful. And I said, it doesn't have to be that way. And I walked and had her said all these things you can do. And I walked out of that meeting. I'm like, this is what I'm going to specialize in. So I was able to turn around a moment that could have not gone so well and made it well. And so for me, it's been continually doing that. And like you had a podcast and I have a YouTube channel and, I'm constantly criticizing, hate your voice. Okay, well, it is what it is. I can't change that. But I'll never forget watching that Brene Brown Man in the Arena speech, which I recommend to people all the time. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to continue to put myself out there because I'd rather do that than being a keyboard warrior or holding myself back. So for me, it's a choice. Am I going to support someone and potentially make the difference? I'm going to choose that every time over not doing that.
Right, right. Oh, that's a beautiful story, beautiful opportunity to show individuals that you can overcome those things that really just initially you just feel like you will never get through. And by moving forward and going through it versus around it, you'd be amazed, right? Just going ahead and taking that challenge on. So kudos to you. So, Julie, what do you think with regards to her experience with vulnerability?
What a unique and creative way to go about that and then be able to help others, like through you recognizing that you needed to be more vulnerable, even though the history of your family basically called for a practice of restraint, a type of restraint, almost like oppressive, which she was astute to identify how that would impact her overall growth, and her overall purpose in her life. So kudos to her for being able to identify that and still challenging herself to become vulnerable, although that she had been taught at a very young age that that's not something we're going to do. That's not something we're teaching you is valuable. So she found the value in vulnerability. I like that when she just said something about becoming curious, instead of becoming offended by someone who said, I hate people like you and what you do. Because that's like when you're attacking somebody's passion for something, I mean, you can really shut the person down. And like me, I'm like that, like at a point in my life where it's easier to shut me down. Whereas before I had all the energy in the world. Like actually you saying something like that would have fueled me. Whereas now it's just like, oh wow, it's like it's making me more reflective.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah, because sometimes people see things that you don't see, right? And sometimes folks, they don't know how to talk, and things come across very condescending, very in a rude way. And so if we could practice to just kind of assume positive intention,
mhm.
looking at a particular statement being negative, look at it as an opportunity for growth, then it's amazing what we might find out, right? And so, yeah, that's pretty interesting that she did take a look at that a particular incident within her life and allowed her curiosity to help fuel to help her in her own growth and development. I thought that was pretty cool. I want to
Now,
go.
piggyback off of what you said, assuming positive intentions. Imagine how much more productive, progressive our world would be if that were the case.
Mhm.
Like if we did assume positive intentions. I'm not saying to the point of foolishness though, right?
That is correct. That is,
Because you can assume positive intentions and be a whole damn fool,
mhm. Where it,
like like get the and probably where the word gaslighting comes from, or where the words like just really just like gaslighting, where people are just so gullible or believe
mhm.
um you know, because they want to be on the positive side of things.
Right, right. Yeah, that definitely is a good point. Um, I want to go back to her family and the fact that how behaviors, how our being is cultivated at a very early age,
God.
right? And I think about like when she shared that with me, I was like, gosh, boy, we can tear up each other at a very young age. They say in the first 5 years you pretty much have developed your character, right? When you're born.
It's Levinson's theory.
Mhm. Say that again.
It's called Levinson's theory that the first 6 years of your life, pretty much,
How you
that's your foundation. That's how you're going to be.
Mhm.
Basically.
And it takes a lot for you to unlearn those behaviors so that you within yourself could develop. And how awesome it is that she found within herself to unlearn that behavior. Because especially when your family is involved and everyone's like, no, you do not share certain things about yourself that makes you look like you might possess incompetency or that you might not know that you have this level of ignorance. And I
Mhm.
keep thinking to myself, when we come from that particular mindset of not being honest, authentic with ourselves, how we live a life that it's a facade. Nothing is real. And I see that a lot. I see it a lot here in the US. I see how, a lot of individuals are living a very inauthentic life. And
Right.
I don't know why that disturbs me because I'm thinking to myself, I don't know you. Why should I care? But I do care. And because it negatively impacts when it's time for us to build a connection with each other. And Brene, she talks about that in the book with regards to authenticity and building connections, etc. Let's listen to Greg and how he shared his experience with vulnerability and some financial struggles that he endured.
In my mid-20s, there's one clear episode I remember being vulnerable, and linking that to what you said about male ego in particular, and vulnerability myths about men and the difference between men and women, I would say. But for men, it's primarily about money and image, isn't it? And looking like this all-powerful person, And I remember in my mid-20s, I had what would look to be a fantastic job. I was head of department in a school, teaching sport, and I was on a good salary, living in the city. And I remember in the middle of the month going to the cash point, putting my card in, and the cash machine just looked at me and went, and I was like,
declined.
Oh my God, So I just bought my first apartment, So on one stage, I'd done really well to get to that place, but on the next part, I was wow, and it crushed my ego. First of all, as we talked about, and I felt vulnerable. I felt vulnerable because I had to basically ask for help. So it's like, how do I go about having enough money to the end of the month whilst maintaining this image that I've got that everyone thinks I'm doing quite well. So I'll be honest, and I don't want to say that I sourced some income off my best friend, who was the best man at my wedding as well, and it took a lot to be to come out and to speak about it. So for me, that was the biggest part. I remember being vulnerable, where men are supposed to be, and she talks about this a lot in the book, where men are supposed to look successful, macho, image. They've got the money, they've got the girlfriend, the house, everything. But the reality is that there are bumps along the road, and it's not that simple. But leading on to what she said about vulnerability as well, what you said about vulnerability and growth, that was a real pivotal moment in my life where I said, look, Greg, I've got to earn more money. And, I brainstormed my mind map, and that led me onto like a really exciting career. So if I wouldn't have had that moment, and that wasn't the first moment, I had 2 or 3 moments like that in my life. And I talked about this with my clients, that actually it's not a negative. What's happening is going to spur you on for something else. I talked to you before, we talked about the spark for a fire, and that was definitely something that ignited a long-lasting fire to go and have a much more sort of prosperous career journey, I would say.
Yes. What I like what you said about the fact that spark is that when we go through these life mishaps, etc., if you are able to allow yourself to be vulnerable and understand that these are just things happen, right? Things happen, that everything is not going to go as planned, but you try you embrace it, you have the capabilities to move through it. And it's interesting and a lot of people talk about mindfulness and meditation, etc. But if you do allow yourself to kind of go through that, it is a, how do I want to say, like a meditative state of mind where you will think and be able to find a solution. I find that when individuals try to circumvent the process, they find it very difficult to overcome the situation. And so what ends up happening is they're like putting these lies on top of a lie, on top of a lie, trying to remember that lie over that lie, etc. And then eventually they lose themselves. They lose sight of reality. So it's great that, you embraced it. You asked for help. And Brene, she talks about that, how there's this big myth that we have to do this life alone, right? And that people are not going to understand when we have good days and bad days, all of these ebb and flows that we have in life. And she's like, no, that's a fallacy. And don't ever lean on that, right? Make sure you understand that there are people who are out here who are supporting you.
I think it is just kind of similar to how we started, the amazing pressure we put on ourselves, even through like vulnerability.
Mhm.
We put and it might I don't want to say that because I do think pressure is the reason really successful people are really successful.
Mm.
Because not only do they have those recommended, I guess, qualities, is that's not the right word, but when Brene Brown is, speaking, and she speaks to vulnerability, it seems like through people's vulnerability, that is how they attain success. For example, if you look at like professional football players or professional basketball players, what makes you even more excited than seeing them handle the ball? Their story, their life story, their family, like where they came from, is super interesting, right?
Mhm.
And they are day in and day out vulnerable. Life is on showcase.
Mhm.
And why did I say that? I said that because of the pressure, the pressure to be great, the pressure for greatness.
Mhm.
Because really success can be defined so many ways, right?
Very true.
So for me, what Greg had to say, it resonated with me.
Mhm.
How he had his realization, and it had more to do with money. But if I'm looking at vulnerability, like for myself, I think I was the most vulnerable as a mom, as a single mom.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah,
So,
because you have to ask for help often,
uh,
right?
often, and I think that was what burnt me out and burnt me up.
Mhm. And burnt you up in a sense because you felt like you were not.
Because I had the capacity. I knew that I had the capacity, but with children, sometimes the timing just isn't, it's not your timing. Some people, which I'm not envious, but I'm just so amazed that people still like, I planned my pregnancy, blah blah blah, I planned everything, I planned this, I planned that.
Mhm.
Mine was unplanned. So um the trajectory of motherhood for me didn't really go how I imagined it would have,
Mm.
should have,
Mhm.
who I thought I was. So
Mm.
so
Yeah. But you were able to overcome that, right? And then serve your child the best that you knew how, by allowing yourself to seek for assistance when you needed it. And
right.
I said
And
that.
super supportive family, like you,
Correct.
my daddy, super supportive family. So I'm thankful for that. But then, like when I look around, I'm just like, gosh, get a lot of people just don't have that. They
True.
don't have that.
True. Yeah. And they have to lean on themselves in order to make it through, stand on their own in order to make it through. But to go back to Gregory, and his kind of financial struggles that he was going through, I mean, we see this particular instance in everyday life, whether it be finance, whether it be having an unplanned pregnancy and now having not being married, having a child out of wedlock and having to take care of this child on your own. We see this in everyday life. And how many times have we seen people have these certain struggles and still be able to rise above? And how did they do that? How did they do that? And I think Greg.
They didn't accept negative connotations. They refused to accept someone else's subscription for their beliefs. So they took ownership in their own belief system.
Correct. Their belief system, accountability, they held themselves accountable for what it is that they were going through. They embraced that particular experience and found a way, not around it, but how to get through it most effectively, right? So I thought that was pretty helpful that he very early on realized, you know what, I don't have the money. I'm going to have to ask for help. And I think that that was pretty awesome that he realized that very early on.
Mhm.
So this is a great segue. I wanted to talk to them about the struggles of vulnerability a little bit more, dive a little bit deeper by taking a look at a statement that Brene had within her book. She stated that vulnerability is courage in you and inadequacy in me. And so I thought that was powerful. I thought to myself, oh, that is interesting. So how often do we see, and you just stated with regards to NBA players, how often do we see individuals show their vulnerability and look at theirs as courage, but God forbid it happen with us. God forbid it happens to me. And within me, I see it as a weakness. And so I wanted to get their perspective on how did they view vulnerability within their lives? Did they view it as courage or a weakness? Let's take a listen to Gregory in his response.
Reflecting on the book's perspective, I saw vulnerability as a courageous act. I think it requires openness and authenticity, which ultimately led me to my outcome, if you like. So while vulnerability may be perceived as inadequacy by others, it recognizes it as a strength that fosters connection and personal development. So, I'll go back to that moment when I put my credit card in the cash machine and it went, I saw that as courageous because first of all, it led me onto a different path. I realized that I had to do something better, but also I'd say both courage and weakness is actually, it made me think, where was I spending all my money to? Because it wasn't just going on my mortgage. I was living in the city and I was trying to portray a different image. I was going out Friday and Saturday night. So actually it allowed for some real personal development as well, where actually I realized that maybe I was drinking too much, partying too hard, and I had to rein it in. And actually, if I hadn't have reined that in and given myself some balance, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in now. So yeah, it was a really, really important moment for me, a defining moment. So that's a great question. So I would say for me personally, it was both courage and weakness. It allowed me to see sort of like an overall picture.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, and I like that you said that it is both, right? Because initially when you are kind of forced into being vulnerable, right? Because the situation happens and you're like, oh my God, I need help. I need somebody to get me through this because I'm not going to be able to do it and I don't want to be out on the streets, right? Just to your particular situation. And so from that perspective, you're like, what in God's name have I done? What am I doing? And it allowed you to reflect on your life, which is amazing because I think oftentimes we need that push. We need that I like to say where we just are running into a wall, that downturn in our life to help us to think differently. And you see actually in a lot, and this is why I kind of brought this particular idea up, because why do we have to wait until we fall on the ground, until we are hurting for us to make a change? And I feel that if we learn to be more vulnerable, learn to be more open and receptive to the idea that we are going to have these downturns in life, and it's not for us to mull over. It's not for us to feel like we're inadequate. It's not for us to, beat ourselves up, for lack of a better term, but it is for us to really try and find the solution, to be more solution oriented and be able to change the course that we initially had placed ourselves on. And the way that we do that is, of course, by being vulnerable, by allowing ourselves to embrace the journey that we're going through and stop trying to circumvent and go around it, and get the help, the resources that we need in order to continue creating the best versions of ourselves. Hey, I really liked what Greg had to say there about the fact that from his perspective, vulnerability, it was courage and a weakness. What were your thoughts on it?
I would say that, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, right? Because vulnerability is like you expect from exposing yourself. You expect, you could expect attack. You could expect, cruelty for, being so open, like with your, let's say, like with your views. Not politics, not anything like that, but just like with your views, with your life values, and people don't necessarily agree with it. So for me, vulnerability is only courage. I don't see how it's a weakness. So I don't think that it can be both.
Okay. You don't think it could be both? I think
I only see it as courage. I don't see it as a weakness, because you're the one being open. You're the one, laying all things out on the table. You're allowing yourself to be exposed.
Well,
that's courageous.
I think from his perspective, where it became a weakness is when it is unplanned, when it is forced upon you to be vulnerable. So he didn't anticipate that in that particular moment he would have to shed light on the fact that he had a negative instance that occurred in his life. And so initially, when vulnerability is forced upon you, I think the view is, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to show that I was being irresponsible. I didn't plan well. And so initially, I think you go through a phase with regards to your emotions. Initially, this looks like a weakness, but when you release that feeling, when you release the fact that maybe perhaps you were a bit irresponsible, or in this particular endeavor, you were inadequate, then it becomes courageous, because now you're asking for help. You're seeking for advice. You are allowing others into that space to help you find a solution.
Discussing it that way, like whether or not it's courage versus a weakness, makes it more complex, because I think the weaknesses that we have, right, like overspending, overeating, overdoing, those are the weaknesses that lead to the vulnerability. I just feel like it's kind of like entwined, like it, or I just don't think that, I think being a vulnerable person displays courage
all the time. Yeah. But that the reason I asked that question, because for someone to look at it in both ways is interesting. For someone to see that, hey, because the question was more around how individuals see it in other people versus themselves. Right. And so some individuals will see, wow, and you had mentioned it when you were talking about NBA players, how they are in the spotlight 24/7, but how their story, if there's a story behind them, it allows them to be perceived in a different light as this individual who had to go through so much to reach to where they are. Oh, that is so great. And then they're sharing their story. Oh, that's so courageous. But before
And
they,
that they're being vulnerable.
yeah, and that they're being vulnerable, and we external to their life look at it as, wow, what courage for that person to go through these things and then to share it with the world so that they can be scrutinized even further. And then when it comes to us, if we were to go through the same plight in life, we would, we would look at it as a weakness within ourselves, because we don't want. And so, for example, Julie Coraccio, one of our guests, stated she grew up with the notion vulnerability is a weakness. Don't you dare show that weakness. Don't let any individuals know that you are vulnerable. And this actually brings me to one of the questions that I had, because I wanted to know. So talk to me a little bit about, have you ever tried to circumvent vulnerability? Because with Julie, especially, she was an individual who didn't want to show it. She couldn't show it because if she did, she would be perceived as, whatever it was that they perceived her as, that showed it as a weakness. And so I wanted to better understand, did you ever circumvent it? And if so, did you ever feel like there were benefits from circumventing it, or consequences? And if never, what were some of the results of embracing vulnerability? The other question that she hones in on, because I'm not going to stop the interview, I'm going to actually let it continue on, is that she shared some of the characteristics that came about as a result of one being vulnerable, characteristics negatively, and when she embraced it. So let's take a listen to Julie talk a little bit about vulnerability and what that looks like.
Younger, I definitely, was not vulnerable. And it was all, and I didn't realize it at the time, but it was like this underlying stress, because for me, one of the ways it came out is always trying to be perfect, right? And not realizing you can never be perfect, right? I was an older lady when I learned that, right? It wasn't something that I learned in my 20s. And I bottled so much in. And as I was thinking about this interview, I was really excited because I had an aha moment about myself. I have always been an emotional eater, and I made that connection. Well, you bottle stuff in, duh, it's got to come out some way, shape, or form. And for me, that was emotionally eating. Or the other thing I would do is I would bottle things up, and then like a volcano would erupt, right? And of course, at the most inopportune times, we're like, what is wrong with you, weirdo? Right? There's something going on. So, people, we think that we can compartmentalize, but at some point, it's just going to explode on us. And so, once I embraced it, I could connect with others better, which was really important. And then the big thing is it helps heal, right? It was just another something that had to be healed. It wasn't anything that was wrong with me. I tried to avoid using words like wrong or mistake, because if I learn something from it, then it's not wrong or not a mistake. Now, if I'm doing the same thing 100 times in a row and not growing and not learning and not paying attention, then that's something completely different. But I'm not talking about this. Most of us are like, I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And so anything that's going to contribute to my healing, it's just, and it can constantly be things. So I think for me, that was the big shift and the big change that happened.
Okay. Okay. I like that word that you said, that you were able to connect and heal. I think that is so important that folks understand when you're more vulnerable. And Brene talks about that. She talks about how she had to do a speech, and I can't remember in front of one of the, was it military or a sports team? But she talked about how the manager or the leader of that organization came to her and said, "Hey, good job. If you didn't show your truth, our men would have saw a basically a liar, someone who was not inauthentic, right from the beginning." And so he was like, but because you showed your vulnerability, it allowed them to connect better with you and have an appreciation for what you stated. And then that aspect of healing, girl, is this a woman thing where we just, when we stress, we just gotta, eat, and then we get into spaces where we're just not taking full care of ourselves. And so, yeah, it allows you to heal, and you'd be amazed when you can release that stress. Your cortisol levels go down. You can lose your belly. I still got time, but you can lose
You and me both. Yeah.
That's a whole nother stress. That's my kids' stress. But that's a good stress. But so you go through these changes that are really positive. So I'm glad that you released and allowed yourself to embrace vulnerability. That's fantastic. Talk to me a little bit about when you embrace vulnerability. From your perspective, what are characteristics that you feel one should possess to be more vulnerable?
Trust, right? I'm trusting, okay, it's for my best good. I've got to trust. I need to learn this. I need to trust that this person needs to be in my life at this moment. So for me, trust is huge. Curiosity, right? Can I come from a place of, that's interesting. Why is that so? Can I? And that to me leads to being more open-minded. If I come from a place of curiosity, then I'm going to be more open-minded instead of immediately going to my ego and having an opinion and shutting it down. And I would say messiness, right? Life's messy. We want to get in the muck, right? It's a lot more fun there. I mean, you can't feel joy if you don't feel sadness, right? And the more that you are able to embrace all your feelings, then you can, the bad with the good. So I would say that. And then the last one I would say is engagement is a word I'd use. And engagement within myself, with others, with the community. It's just, for me, that chain reaction.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you so much for that feedback. The one you went on, not engagement, but the one right before, help me to recall. Messiness. Nope, it was the one right before.
Curiosity.
Yeah, that is a big one. That one is a big one. I truly believe that, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, it allows us to really see things that we once did not see before. And I think that's where we talk about those, Ray spoke about the blind spots. If you don't allow yourself to be curious, to be open, and you have that tunnel vision, right? You won't be able to see more broadly. All right, what was your take on Julie and
her? And like she said, that made it easier to connect. So like being vulnerable allows you to, especially because we go back to the story, right? Everybody has a story. We're trying to, vulnerability allows you, well, not it allows you, but being vulnerable and telling your story, and just depends on the depth of your story as well too, but just the connections you're able to make, the way people want to help you when they know that you have vulnerabilities. They don't want to see, the perfect individual. I think from that, what that comes from is us wanting to be like one another, like knowing that
you're not alone.
Right, you're not alone, and that other person, oh, they experienced that too? No way. Like, you know what I mean? Like sometimes our perception of people is just like they're so strong or, you know.
Well, I think about when individuals finally arrive and we see them, especially in the media, we see them at their arrival, right? We don't ever see the
Never see.
point that it took for them to get there. And that's why I love sometimes when we do have the opportunity to go back, on these different TV stations and they do bioptic series or something of that nature where we get to take a look deeper into an individual's life and better understand that, wow, life is not a straight and narrow process. It's a complete jacked up jungle gym, and we're going forward and backward, up and down, having ebb and flows, good days, bad days. And I think if we had more opportunities to see that reality up front, then we would be more vulnerable. And we talk about it a little bit later, especially when I think about students who are coming out of college. And there's this perception that, they got to get ahead quickly, and that this particular success doesn't take time, because it does. It takes time. It takes you being vulnerable, you sharing with others, building your network, being able to connect so that you can build your network so that you can have that growth that you
I
see.
think that's what you see on like social media platforms. You have people sharing their content, sharing their creativity. And like if you go in the comments sometime, they've been vulnerable sharing something, like their artistry that maybe somebody does or does not connect with. And the comments are so harsh. If you sat there and read your comments, you'd probably be so broken, because people go so hard on these social media platforms.
Don't they go hard? Well, what did I call it? Is like liquid courage when folks get to drinking and they just start.
Because they're behind a screen,
They're behind the screen, they get so much courage and
behind a moniker.
behind,
We don't have to have our real names.
Exactly. But yeah, they'll beat you down, not realizing that, wow, it took it took it took courage for you to do this and share it with the world. And then the struggle that you probably went through in order to be able to sh feel comfortable sharing your talent, and then the beat down come. No constructive criticism. I'm like, can we learn to be constructive? No, I don't believe that no one should be criticized. I think we all should be criticized. I think the first time I felt in my life where someone looked at me and was open and honest was my last job. My last job was this woman, and she was like one of the most open and honest to me about, what she saw, etc. And I was like, wow, this is the first. I've never had anyone speak to me in this manner. And I actually thanked her. I was like, oh, thank you. I'm glad that someone was able to share their perspective with me. Because from my perspective, I've always been a vulnerable person. I will share with folks kind of the struggles that I've gone through in life, and not for individuals to be like, oh, woe is me, or to do it for attention, but to do it to either to help someone, get through their plight in life, or to get feedback. Because I believe constructive criticism is what we need in order to grow. So yeah, but to go back to Julie and some of the benefits and consequences, I do like the fact that she shared that, it allowed her to realize that perfectionism does not exist. We can always progress towards perfection, but perfectionism doesn't exist. It truly needs to be a word taken out of our vernacular, because it just doesn't exist. But we always we can grow, we can always work towards perfection, because in life, up until the day you die, you are going to be learning something new, something different, to help improve who you are or improve your transition or your experiences that you are going through. So I really like that. Let's take a listen to Greg and how he changed his accent to rub elbows with a Russian billionaire.
I think there's many ways to look at this, but there's certainly been instances where I've tempted to avoid vulnerability, thinking it would protect me, I'd say. However, I realized this approach, on the flip side, resulted in like a negative downward slope for me, if you like. It had consequences on the outside. So, and I imagine, with your background as a consultant, that you've seen this as well. In England, we like to say, let's say, so I went from being a teacher and I needed more money. So I went to get this crazy job, great money, but working in central London in Kensington for a Russian billionaire. Imagine what that was like. A guy like me walking in front, in my late 20s, walking into a room with a Russian billionaire. And that was when I was at my most vulnerable. It's all good putting a salary and you apply for it and thinking, do you know what, I can do it. But actually, it's easy to talk the talk, but walking the walk is something slightly different, isn't it? And that was when I was at my most vulnerable. So to overcome that, and this is something that I relate with all the clients that I work with, especially the CEO and executive level men, I've been in their position. I put on an accent. I'm not going to lie. I'm from the south of England, and you guys all love the English accent, obviously.
Yes.
I try to be someone different. And interestingly, that was when I was vulnerable because I thought I had to be someone else. And I put on an accent, and that led to me not being my authentic self. And actually, what happened was, in embracing that vulnerability and maybe not embracing how I should have done, it led to me. I'd say I lost a few friends in my life. Friends who I went to school with, who grew up in the south of England, where I'm from, and I don't think they quite liked the person that I was growing into. Not being myself. Not being my authentic self. So, yeah. So that was, an example where I embraced it. And like I said, I speak to that with clients as well. I imagine these CEO executive level guys that I work with on the outskirts, on the outside, their life looks fantastic. But and the reality is they're actually missing something. And most of all, I tell them, just be yourself. If you want to play golf, play golf. If you want to eat this, then, do what makes you happy. Ultimately, be yourself. And I think that's the most important part. And that is one of the things that I really got from the book as well. Was those vulnerability myths, I would say.
Yes, yeah. I don't know about you, but and I don't know if it's because I got 100,000 kids. I only got 4, but I don't know if it's because I got a lot of kids. But I can't remember. I cannot remember what I did from 1 millisecond ago to now, so like me trying to put on airs and, trying to do all these different things that take me away from being my authentic self, and allowing me to that and preventing me from, truly going through whatever I'm experiencing with authenticity. I think it hinders our ability to be a recipient of grace. Because people can sense that. People can sense when you're inauthentic. People can sense when you're not being open and honest. And like you shared, I lost a lot of friends. I think people saw that and they didn't like who I was becoming. And so in order to, kind of while you're going through the process and developing and growing, etc., through that process, you want to make sure that you keep your tribe together because, as she said, myth, I believe, number 4 is don't try to do this alone. We're going to, at one point or another, need help. And so you want to be able to lean on those individuals and they're not looking at you like, he's full of crap. He's always crying wolf. I thought you had it all together. You don't want to lean on them and then they're bringing up all of these different things that they noticed about you. You want to be able to go to individuals and they are truly open to helping you and not focusing on who you were faking to be, right?
Yep.
Love that story.
I
Uh,
wonder what he did. Like, so did he change his accent only when he was around that billionaire, or was he like? Because, excuse me, I don't know how they're able to even get rid of their accent, because some of the actors that want to act in America that are from Great Britain, they do that. They go to voice coaches to unlearn their voice.
mhm,
And think of that, unlearn your voice.
mhm. Well, I think when we talk about it from an artistry perspective, that's so that you can get a particular role and you
Yeah,
are.
no, I'm not saying, and I'm not going into that depth. That just came to me, like, we do things to unlearn our authenticity. Like, your voice is an authentic exclusion about yourself, like the way we sound, you
Mhm,
know, and you doing things to unlearn that, or you using strategies to conceal or suppress that, to kind of move around,
mhm,
um, so because you feel as if it makes you vulnerable,
mhm.
actually.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, he used a different accent to please someone, to put up airs
Mhm.
about who he was and where he was from.
Oh, because they have different accents in different parts of England. So his
Correct.
friends, probably the reason why he was losing his friends is probably because they got the perception, like, wait, we're from the south of England, we sound like this, and you sound like a northerner, like, or something to that. So no,
And I'm sure
that's a good story.
I didn't ask him, but I'm sure his character changed as well because he felt like he had to move a certain way. Greg's story was pretty interesting, and I do appreciate that he came to a point in his life where he realized that he had to make some changes, right? I want to share a quote that I had found that I really think speaks to what we have learned here today, especially about both of our guests. The quote goes like this. It says, "The illiterate of the future are not those who can't read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn."
Mm,
And I think the stories that we had an opportunity to listen to today really speaks to that. Because if we don't have that capability to learn from our plights in life, to learn, to unlearn, which is what Julie did, right? She unlearned a certain behavior and relearned how to be vulnerable, etc. We hinder our capabilities to grow. We hinder progressiveness. We hinder our ability to connect with
mm,
one another,
mhm,
so that individuals can feel comfortable and confident in knowing that they, although they're going through something within their life, that they can overcome it.
mhm,
And so I just wanted to share that quote because it really spoke to me about the importance of, even if we did come from a certain environment where folks said, do not do this, take heed, because in that you might be losing something.
mhm,
In the secrecy, you might be hindering not only your growth, but the growth of others. And I shared this several episodes ago. We are keys that unlock doors, each one of us. Each one of us serve as a key to unlock a door. whether that is the door within our life, but it could be the door in someone else's life. And if we don't learn how to be more vulnerable, be more open, be more authentic, we might be hindering our ability to progress within life. And so I love that quote. I loved hearing Julie and Greg's stories about what it took for them to get to that point of being vulnerable and the benefits that came out of being vulnerable. It's okay. It's going to be all right. All right. So, of course, I could not leave my guests. I could not let my guests leave me without speaking about principles. As you know, over the course of this year, we are focusing on Ray Dalio's book, Principles. And this month, it's all about being radically open-minded. And of course, I had to ask them the question with regards to their principles and what do they lean on every day to help in managing their lives and their businesses. And so I'm not going to play their clips, but Greg, he shared with regards to some of the principles that he leans on, and we heard it actually throughout our whole conversation here today. He stated authenticity is critical to possess, being authentic, true to yourself. He talked about time management, and he gave a couple techniques. I'll put those techniques in the description for you to learn about. He talked about being mindfulness, and that life is a continual learning process, making sure that we are learning day in and day out. And then Julie, she shared that one of her principles was radical transparency.
Oh, I like that.
Oh, that was really, really good. Radical transparency. So just making sure that in everything that she does, she's showing her truth, being transparent, because, and I think she shared it earlier on in our interview, she shared a particular instance in which she was transitioning into having her own business and then having to get up in front of individuals and speak. And she had to do a 30-second spiel and she couldn't do it. Right. And she was like, man, I had to, and she said the only thing she got out really was her name and what her business was. And so, sharing that experience and then allowing individuals to come into her life when that occurred and encourage her. And she said, and now today, I have no problems with public speaking. It's easy for me to do. And it took that particular instance of failing, of her going through that process in order for her to find success. The last question that I had honed in on was if they had to leave a message for the next generation, what are some lessons or principles they would leave to ensure that they stayed on the right path to success? And Greg, he had shared very similar to some of his principles, just making sure that individuals embrace vulnerability. And we heard earlier on, he was someone who embraced vulnerability very early on, making sure that we are showing our authentic self, being resilient, because I will tell you, folks will beat you down. Folks will beat you down, and you have to learn how to push through. And then, of course, continuous learning. I'm going to play Julie's clip, one of the messages that she wanted to share and provide for the next generation, some lessons and principles. Let's take a listen.
I have a couple. Do a job and do it well. Now, never stay in an abusive situation. I'm not saying that, but I'm not a fan of quiet quitting and phoning it in, right? If someone's giving you a paycheck and they treat you well, you honor that, because I think you do yourself a disservice as much as you do someone else a disservice. You learn from it, and then you take, maybe it inspires you to start your own business. I was treated really poorly at the last job, and I was like, anything's better than this. And it gave me the courage. So I'm grateful every day. Thank you for being so horrible to me, because now I've started my own business, right? It's all about perspective.
Yes.
Mentioned at the beginning, it's not a mistake if you learn. So don't spend our time beating ourselves up. You learn from it and move forward. Find something that you're passionate about. Have fun. I'm looking at act 3 of my life right now. As I've been thinking about my legacy, I want to have a cat sanctuary, probably dogs. Dogs need home too. So I'm like, oh, I have fundraising skills. I have some social media skills. Am I going to create my legacy, right? And so don't feel like, and if you are in the same job for 50 years, that's okay too. But just be open to all the possibilities that out there. Then my last thing that I would want to leave people with is to know that they are good enough, they are worthy enough, and they are loved no matter what. We all make mistakes, we all stumble, but remember that, because we're either coming from love or we're coming from fear, right? So try to come from love as much as you can.
Oh, that is such a beautiful note. You
Powerful.
gave me goosebumps, girl. I love you. I love you. And I love that you came
Aw.
on and you helped to enlighten the next generation that's coming up. Because it is tough, when we come out of school, and I don't know where that comes from, but when you're coming out of school, whether it be high school, trade school, whatever, there's this whole thought that I really don't know where it comes from, of the gladiator games is what I call it. Where we're coming out, cutting throats, trying to get ahead, etc. And we're operating out of, I think it's fear, always, not
1000%,
wanting
yeah.
not wanting to be vulnerable, so that we are green. And I said, I'm like, you're green. Folks know you just came out of school. They know that you're not going to understand, right? But, so they come out with a whole different, and just to be able to encourage the next generation that, life is not like the older you get, you realize we all wrong. So take heed and learn from us old whippersnappers.
Yes.
and, and when you leave or come out, you come out with love, come out with understanding, come out with respect, for yourself and for your employer. So that's fantastic.
What she said was powerful. And you know what is in alignment for me, and a repetitive theme of what both guests had to say was about truth. And we are in an era of truth. This entire era is going to be about truth and not allowing people to escape being vulnerable. You're going to be forced to tell your story, and you're going to be forced to tell it truthfully as well too.
Yeah. That is so true, because I tell you, and I had noticed it actually when I came back, when I was living overseas, and I came back and I was like, I don't know, my eyes were open to a whole different world that I don't think that I necessarily saw before. And, I used to tell folks, I was this bubbly Black girl living in my bubble, just doing me, not really noticing a whole lot. But it was really, I felt like it was so many inauthentic people. And my mind was really blown. My mind was blown by what I was witnessing. And but I was excited to see it and be able to witness the transition that is occurring, especially here within the States. It's especially when they started bringing, they brought out all these different reality shows, and then we found out that the reality shows were scripted and no, right? Because we thinking these people are really doing these.
Scripting your life, like
Who thought of that? And it's because we have to sensationalize life. We have to make it more interesting.
entertaining.
Right, because but but I think there is a space for entertainment, right? Because there's certain reality shows that, you know, I think, okay, they can be a little bit scripted, but not life. Show the truth. Show the truths within life. And if people get bored, God dang it, that's life. I mean, the reality is that life is not always going to be this big TV show. You're going to have downturns in life where you don't see anybody and they don't see you, and you're living in obscurity, and that is your life, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, you come out of the woodwork, right? And I was sharing that with you, how that it's a fallacy when we show it in that light, because especially when media shows it in that light, that all of a sudden they just come on the scene and they're successful, right? And we don't show the plight that folks go through to get to where they are. We don't show. And so now you have people hiding who they are, not being comfortable in showing, what they had to go through to get to where they are. And you have a whole bunch of individuals being inauthentic, not showing their truth.
Mhm.
So it's just it's interesting that it's interesting, this whole particular topic, when I dove into the whole notion of being more open-minded, and then some of the barriers that Ray Dalio shared, that ego and that blind spot, and trying to understand, well, where does it come from in the first place? And hopefully today our audience had an opportunity to witness where the birth of egoism comes from, where those blind spots, why we have them. And then now, hopefully through listening to Greg's story, listening to Julie's story, you can have a better understanding as how to alleviate that before it becomes an issue, how to overcome that before it becomes an issue. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to share?
The last Julie's again, her statements she made, her advice that she gave were most powerful. I resonated with what she had to say, especially like about leaving a legacy. And this is like an epiphany for me, because I told you what happened to me at work and how, healthcare has changed so much, and the challenges that we have in healthcare, you know, people treating you badly, and treating you so badly, like you're like, thank you. Now I'm gonna go open my own business. So this really kind of awakens me and lets me know, like listening to her, that let me know that I need to open my own business.
Mm-hmm.
I need to leave organization. It's never been a place I've ever fit in, because I don't play politics well.
Mm-hmm.
I've never played politics well. This is inbred in me from a little person.
Mm-hmm.
In school, I was challenged. I've never been a subordinate very well.
No.
I've never played well as a subordinate. I mean, I can remember I had to think about that, and I even told Daddy. I said, remember all those times I come home from school and on my report card it'd be like, student is insubordinate. Do you know how many years that was written on probably my report card? I wish I could find them.
Mm-hmm.
Probably all through elementary, I'm sure of,
Mm-hmm.
that I experienced that. But yeah, so her statements, and both guests, awesome guests, so awesome choices. So that was a really nice touch, really excellent conversation, I think, on vulnerability, on living in your truth, on utilizing Ray Dalio's principles to kind of piece together our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So very meaningful segment for me today, because now I know I have to get started, and I better hurry up.
Well, it's never too late because it's
Get
really
old. I was like, well, yeah, I'm already
no. I think, and we got to get away from that. Media does a
the
good
age. I know, because she was like, because
thing.
she when Julie said that, she like, I want me a cat sanctuary. And I think that's so awesome. People who work with animals, because you know
Mhm.
how much I love animals.
Of course, you would be awesome. You would definitely be awesome.
Uh,
Yeah, I mean, don't ever let, because this whole society is all jacked up with regards to the fact that ageism, and we don't have the ability to recreate our lives and be successful at an older age. I just think about J.K. Rowling's,
oh yeah.
so many different individuals who have started their careers very late, and ended up still finding success.
Mhm,
Still
mhm.
finding success. So yeah, don't let that steer you wrong. Do you, girl? Do
Uh,
you?
Hey, this week we'll start. I gotta dig my heels in.
Dig your heels in and let's get moving. All
Mhm.
right, all right. Up next, the tangential mind. Today, Tiffany has a song choice for us today. Tiffany, what song did you find for us?
We talk so much about truth and connectivity, and this being an era of truth and vulnerability. Um, and so of course I looked up and found Truth and Honesty by Aretha Franklin. And just to share with you, it's a soulful ballad by the legendary Aretha Franklin. A song about the importance of honesty and authenticity in relationships, and how the lyrics convey a message of vulnerability and the need for a genuine connection. So you guys go out and listen to that song.
How does it go? Do
Keep
you
this
know?
going. No,
Oh,
I
okay.
think
What
I
and
can
what was the
sing it.
title?
Truth and Honesty
Oh,
by
it's called
Aretha
Truth and
Franklin.
Honesty. Okay. All right.
Mhm.
All right, all right. Oh, cool. I love that you're coming out with the song choices. I love that. That's
Uh,
that's awesome. All right. We'll definitely check it out. Thanks for that. Join us in 2 weeks as we build on our principle, open-mindedness, where we will discuss experimentation or prototyping with your life. We look forward to you joining us. And in preparation for our discussions, we will be revisiting a chapter in Designing Your Life on prototyping. So if you were here and joined us for our very first episode in season 1 and picked up a copy of Designing Your Life, we will be revisiting that book. Make sure to grab a copy. It is chapter 6, in which we will be focusing on. All the details are in the description. To access all replays or learn more about Kinky Knots Cafe, Proactive is the way, please visit www.kinkyknotscafe.com. Proactive is the way, my friends. Take good care.